Hi guys, Freddy here. Welcome back to another Retro RPG. At the end of another week, and the end of another poll, we've got the slimmest of slim wins for Rift's World Book 1 Vampire Kingdoms. Now I'll cover that on the desktop in a wee second, and as usual I'll be back at the end of the video with some other poll related stuff and channel related stuff, so I hope to see you there. You could be a Scottish laird. Under an ancient Scottish law where anyone who owns land in Scotland can use the title of laird before their name, a law which actually doesn't exist. But what the hell, I'm willing to assign you a piece of my garden in the lowlands of Scotland and offer you a printable certificate to use the title of laird. Just join our Patreon at the laird level, choose a section of my garden, and then you can be a laird of Scotland. See my Patreon below, where you can get access to my videos a week early, help the channel out, be credited at the end of videos, and stake a claim to a tiny little piece of Scotland. Offer has no standing under law. Offer does not give you any real rights to part of my garden. Offer does not really make you a landowner. Offer is no different to all other Scottish title offers out there. So, this is Vampire Kingdoms, Rift's World Book 1, which came out from Palladium Books in 1991. And, as it describes itself on the cover, it's a mega sourcebook for Rifts, which is just about the most Rifts way of describing something. To go with its mega damage, it's a mega sourcebook. Now, this, like the Atlantis sourcebook I covered, which was World Book 2, is very influential on setting up the way Rifts worked, fleshing out the world. Now, while Atlantis, I think, has had a much longer term effect on shaping the world, this one shows off the absolute creativity and imagination that Rifts has. It really takes some wonderful ideas in fantastic directions. But we'll cover that as we go through. Let's have a look at the back cover. So, Vampires and the Vampire Kingdoms. The vampire is an optional player character. New techno-wizard devices for slaying vampires. Villains and monsters. Mayan gods, demons, and the temple ruins. The mystery of the Yucatan Peninsula. Dual dimensions coexisting in the same location. Travelling shows, good and evil. Reed's Rangers, vampire hunters. Juarez City, a place of evil and decadence. Art by Long, Truman, and Simbider. A mega sourcebook for Rifts, compatible with the entire Palladium Books megaverse. And inside, we get the same absolutely wonderful artwork. I absolutely adore this picture of a vampire clown here. Fantastic stuff. Palladium Books does have some of the most imaginative artwork out there. It really is so creative and makes the books almost worth their value alone, even if you discount the absolutely fantastic content. We've got a contents page here, some thoughts by the author, telling you how they're not going to be pulling punches, they're really creating vampires as a monster. They're not just creating them as targets for you to use your mega damage weaponry on. And then we go into vampires. We've got undead vampires. And then we've got the vampire intelligence. Now this is the way that Rifts takes vampires in its own imaginative way, while keeping them fairly generic in their abilities. So, the vampire intelligence is a Cthulhu-esque type god being from another dimension, which looks for worlds to harvest. So, it has found Earth, and it's reached through, and it has connected with a being. And they are the first vampire, and then they bite and drain and do ordinary vampire things to create their progeny. And so down a pyramid of people who get further and further away from the vampire intelligence. Now, the vampire intelligence's aim is to take over and feast on the entire population of Earth. But to progress its aims, it needs to create more vampires. Once it creates a certain amount of vampires, then their energy creates an anchor which allows it to bring itself through. And obviously it is far more dangerous than the vampires it creates. So it details how these beings, because there's more than one vampire intelligence, there's a number of them, it gives you their stats. It talks about the demon familiar, an extension of the vampire intelligence. It gives you ideas here how to destroy the intelligence. Stop the nightmare before it begins. Destroy the intelligence. Forced abandonment. And then we've got vampire minions. So the master vampire. Talking about how they're created. Secondary ones. We've got wild vampires. An optional player character. RCC. So players can play as vampires, people who have gained the power of the vampire, but don't necessarily follow its goals. And we've got guides here, so vampires as player characters, a conflict of nature, nocturnal habits. Their powers, their lust for blood, their feeding frenzy. Starvation can lead to insanity, permanent insanity, the vampire's bite, creating the undead, slowly killing things, passive victims. Again, a lovely piece of artwork, the dead-eyed vampire, something which I like the artwork so much in Night's Edge for Cyberpunk, so it carried across here. It's got the Rift style to it, but I do like the idea of vampires being soulless creatures and the eyes being the gateway to the soul. So we've got mind control. Psionic powers of the vampire, including metamorphosis. Got some lovely artwork here of taking the stake out and a vampire reforming. All these sort of abilities of classic vampires from historical literature, you know, the ideas formed around the novel of Dracula, etc., are carried through here. So, because these are being powered from a godlike being from another dimension, the effects of other gods and deities can affect that link. So holy symbols work, for example. They're justified that way. Carrying on, we've got summon vermin, limited invulnerability, super regeneration, eternal life. Natural abilities to a vampire. To kill a vampire, their weaknesses, the wooden stake, the silver bullet, protection by herbs, protection by the symbol of the cross. Death by water, death by sunlight. It's keeping all these ideas together, you know, soil of the homeland. Vampire combat notes, talking how these things affect costs of bow weapons, because bows obviously fire a wooden shaft through the heart, so are very useful. Techno-wizard anti-vampire weapons. Other Techno-wizard devices. Vampires versus magic. Vampires and weapons. Vampires versus psionics. Going into all the different powers of the Rift's universe and how they act against vampires. You know, what good are vampires against robots? Total conversion Borgs. Grappling them. Vampires changing into mist to avoid being held. Blood loss table for victims of vampire bites. You know, the effects of dragons and Psystalkers, mutant dogs. And then we're on to the vampire kingdoms themselves, Central America. So Mexico and that have fallen to a vampire intelligence. And it goes into how this has affected the area. Keeping in universe by using the character of Erin Tarn, the explorer who details most of these source books. So, the Northern Wastelands, the Vampires' Great Deception, the Wild Vampires of North Mexico, Vampire Clans, activities other than feeding, Vampire Civilization, the entire ideal vampire habitat, Rifts, Mexico and Central America, you know, talking the effects. So it's hot and dry, the weather changes and seasons are minimal, periods of daylight hours and nighttime darkness are more evenly divided. So if it went to the extreme north or south, yes, it would get 24 hours of darkness, but in the summer it would get 24 hours of daylight, which would affect it. The tribal lords, vampire towns and cities, the vampire kingdom of Exotis, I don't know how to pronounce that. And we've got various locations within these. They absolutely detail some wonderful settings in here. So we've got Vampire Kingdoms, the different cities within it. The Mexico Empire, Mexico City, capital of the Mexico Empire. Again, detailing out the history of it. Tula, the Tula intelligence. The Mexico Empire's defenses. We've got the Mulik Kingdom, the Milta Kingdom. And all the vampires in any of these. The Strongholds of Man, the Tampico Military Protectorate, Monterrey, Los Alamos. Traveling beyond the threshold of humankind. We've got El Paso with the El Paso police who protect people there. The gang problems. The Wildcats gang. The Canines. Mutant animals. The Trogs. The Hammer, a human gang. Different gangs that control it. City highlights. So we've got the El Paso Magic Shop. Open Market. Halloway Armory and Outfitter, different locations within it, which just flesh out it and make it a far more interesting place to visit than just a description of its history. Ciudad Juarez, if I'm pronouncing that right. So we've got the police that protect it, but good cops where? The police aren't actually that out for the people. The government, the different gangs that control it. A psycho gang, the guard, the skivers, the nightmasters. Are there no vampires in Ciudad Juarez? The Guild of the Gifted. Rasputin the Grey, a guild high lord. And then we've got locations. So we've got a store sells a variety of items, including pre-riffs, artifacts, magic items, magic services. We've got Juanita's Boarding House, the Golden Pheasant Restaurant, the Good Cheers Saloon. Really fleshing out with lots of locations for this. Opium B's Fix-It Shop, Steve's Gags and Gifts, Morley's Mortuary, Lydia's. Hundreds of them. So Seligson and Jordan Attorneys and Counselors, the House of Healing, Merchant's Pony Express Office, Sunshine Vampire Exterminator Agency, the Vasquez Tattoo Parlor. Hundreds and hundreds of locations. Well, we're up to 106 here. Betty's Black Market Body Parts, the South Wall Theatre and Freak Show. Got a map, which isn't that great, but it's pretty decent. It shows individual buildings. And it'd be nice to have a guide to the roads rather than just empty space between them. You know, are there fences? Are there walls? Are there any way of getting around apart from just taking a trek between somebody's house? So we end up with 136 locations just in that one town. But then we've got different areas, so the east side of it. And it's got all its locations as well, going up to 25 in there. And then we're on to Doc Reed and his Vampire Hunters, the Vampire Hunters of Mexico. Reed's Rangers, the Place of Dreams, their home, Fort Reed. The equipment of forces available there. The people behind the legend. So we've got the different characters. So Raul Lazarius, Bequita the Faceless One, Viocly the Hunter, and Hero of Eagle Peak, Mital the Butcher, all the characters from this one group. And we've got freak shows, circuses and travelling shows, a source of evil, so talking about them. Creating a travelling show, and going through the details, you know, creating the travelling show features, the vehicles that they use, different communication systems and security that they would have, the different acts they've got, so clowns, jugglers, tumblers, different rides they've got, so Pony Express, horse ride, elephant rides, different personnel, so they might be bringing prostitutes with them, medicine men, expert worms, cyber docs, special forces, Mr. Drack's travelling circus. So Mr. Drack, who is obviously supposed to be a Dracula ripoff. And what else we got? Shapers, an intelligent DB animal which goes along with them. The amazing Dr. Grey Matter, a coalition experimental cyborg. Captain Daring, an escape artist supreme. Then we're on to the Night Arcade and Freak Show. Dr. Esteban Marico, another very obvious Dracula lookalike. Then we've got Vampire Clowns, secondary vampires. Vampire Carnival Thieves, Carnival Henchmen. DBs and Human Henchmen, which follow along. Sci-Fi, Psychic and Mutant Siamese Twins. Mr. Lazario, Lord of the Reptiles. Lazaro's Menagerie, including Benito the Brutosaur, a giant reptilian humanoid summoned by the Mad Melody. The Carnival's Mistress of Magic. Bone Cruncher, a freak strongman and dragon slayer. Then we've got the mysterious Yucatan. Traveling the Yucatan Peninsula by land, speed and visibility, notes and features. The overview, so the home of the Jaguar people. Then we've got maps, showing the different ways of travelling, the journeys between them and the ley lines. The region of phantoms. Tikal, the domain of Lord Chuch Makwik. Maybe? And that's Gonna be as good as I go for pronouncing it. The People of Wood. The Cub came, the Phantom, the Lord of Uxakun. No, not even going to try that one. I give up. Zoltan, One Death, ruler of Zoltan. El Mirador, Rio Beck. Now, obviously, some kind of king with his dogman and his bodyguard. The Lair of the Multuk Intelligence, Chichen Itza, the Lair of Kamazots. And we've got different monsters, the Jaguar people, we've got to detail those out, Spider Demons, the Death Weavers, Dibuks, Demon Ghouls, Incubuses and Succubuses, the Mindolar, the Mind Slug. And on the back page we've got Agenor, the River Serpent. So, Vampire Kingdoms filled with absolutely fascinating ideas, taking vampires in their own Rifts type direction, creating enemies that can be dealt with using ancient vampire lore, but also have their sci-fi edge, the dimensional aspects of the Rifts leading to absolutely everywhere, not just other planets, but other dimensions, bringing amazing variety to the world. For the first sourcebook, this just is so full of ideas and a wonderful addition to it, even if it's perhaps not left such an indelible mark on the world of Rifts as the Atlantis sourcebook did. So that was Vampire Kingdoms for Rifts, and that won the poll this week on 28% of the vote. Only a single vote ahead of Starships of the Galaxy for the Star Wars by Wizard of the Coast, which came in on 27%. In fact, until last night, the two of them were tied, and before that, Starship of the Galaxy actually had quite a remarkable lead, which closed and closed as time went on. Behind those, on 21%, was Wanted by Kraken for the West End Games version of the Star Wars role-playing game. Behind that was the Reformation Coalition Equipment Guide for Traveller to the New Era on 14%. And in last place, we had the Star Drives Arms and Equipment Guide for the Alternative role-playing game by TSR, which came in on only 10%. Now, as usual, they're all wiped out the poll, and we're going on to a Retro Adventures. And last time we had one, I promised you I'll be letting some of the big boys back in. Because Shadowrun, Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu tend to dominate the polls, last time I skipped all over those and let smaller games in. But I promised you I'd let the big boys back, so I have done this time. So, first of all, we have Mercurial for Shadowrun. Now, I used to think this was the first published adventure, but actually the second, because DOA, which we've covered on the channel before, was the actual first. Unless you include the DM screen, which came out shortly ahead and had a package adventure, but these were the separately published ones, and Mercurial was the second one. And next up we've got Masks of Nalhotep for Call of Cthulhu. This is one of the most famous Call of Cthulhu campaigns out there, absolutely massive, absolutely epic, so it'd be great to cover. Next up we've got The Isle of Dread for Dungeons & Dragons from TSR in 1981. Now this I'm kind of hoping doesn't win, because I am right at the end of this adventure as a player. We've been playing it for the last 6 months. So, just in case we don't wrap it up in the next session before I have to make the video, I really hope that this doesn't win, but we shall see. We're actually playing a more modern version, so it's slightly different, so I don't think I'll be spoiling anything for myself by reading through it. But I'd much rather not, but it was the Dungeons & Dragons adventure I found. Next up we've got the ISIS coordinates for the Star Wars role-playing game by West End Games. Now, this isn't one of the more famous adventures, it's not Tatooine Manhunt or anything like that, but it's a nice little adventure. West End Games really did produce great quality adventures, which really felt like Star Wars, so it'd be fun to cover. And last up, we've got Slaughter Margin for the Judge Dredd role-playing game. Now, I was looking through for what was fifth in the poll, and Slaughter Margin jumped at me because it's a nice chunky boxed set. It's a big box with the adventure and lots of maps and stuff in it, so it'd be wonderful to cover. Let's go ahead and see which one of those wins the poll. On other channel related stuff, well, there's no real progress on any of the side projects. I haven't had a chance to get anything done. I've had a really busy first week of 2023. But I would like to comment on one of my videos, one of my most popular videos recently, and when I say most popular, I mean getting massive amounts of downvotes, was my video on Wizard of the Coast and the new OGL license. Whereas I thought that Wizard of the Coast is just doing what a corporation's doing, talking about how to make the most money, and the OGL isn't likely to change much, because in the OGL it states that you can use any version of the license which is authorized. Well, in the last few days it has emerged, supposedly people have a copy of the OGL 1.1, which deauthorizes the older versions. Although the legality of that is to be seen. Can you deauthorize an authorized version which says it's granted in perpetuity? Who knows? I'm not a lawyer. I'm guessing there's going to be big court cases fought about this if this is true. But I don't really want to go into any details about this, because the OGL 1.1 that everybody's discussing, firstly, I can't find a copy anywhere on the internet. They're sharing it between themselves, and people are commenting on articles which say they've seen a copy. I'll hold back until I find a copy. Also, on this copy that's going around, this 1.1 version, it apparently says it's going to be released on the 4th of January 2023 to take priority, to take over on the 13th of January. Well, I'm sat here on the 7th of January recording this, and it's not been released. So that makes me think that perhaps this isn't the final version, that this isn't something we need to be worried about until it actually comes out. But I could be totally wrong. I will accept I'm just an idiot talking on the internet. But the fact that my video came out, it's had a decent amount of views for one of my videos, but it's also had about half the number of downvotes as upvotes, and it's quite actually rare for my videos to get many downvotes, because people are coming looking for a particular kind of thing. Whereas this video obviously brought in a wider audience, and they hate the fact that I'm not willing to be critical of Wizard of the Coast until they actually do something. Once they do something, I will be critical of them, but I'm not listening to made-up stories and what people think will happen. We shall see what actually happens and then react to it, instead of reacting to a fiction. Anyway, I think I've whittled on for quite long enough as usual, so thank you very much for watching. But most of all, as always, you look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye now.